Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. It's great to see you today. Now, if you are tuning in right now live on LinkedIn and probably YouTube as well, and probably Facebook as well, our original broadcast had a glitch. So we are broadcasting with you live stream right now on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So I'm your host again, Erin Urban, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today for a casual conversation that is a catalyst for change. Now, if you've never seen my smiling face before, you will find out more about me at coachyurban.com. And speaking of change, the world around us is shifting, but are you ready to make that shift? So I'm excited to have you tune in today to discuss how to upshift your life and unlock your potential with international professional coach and consultant, Melissa Leich. As you tune in, don't be shy. Say hi, share where you're from, whether you're watching live or whether you're listening to the replay or listening to the podcast. We're live around the world, as I mentioned before, on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can access all the shows and be notified of live streams, particularly if there is an error on one of them. Plus, the Career Coffee Chat podcast is available to all the major podcasting platforms as well. So I'd love to have your feedback. So give us a show, a star, a rating, a like, thumbs up on your favorite podcasting platform, because your feedback is important to me. I do care about what your thoughts are about the podcast. And again, you can find out more about me and how to access your zone of genius, unlock your fullest potential at coachyurban.com. Unlocking your potential, speaking of during difficult times, is exactly what we'll be chatting about today with our world traveling guest, Melissa. We'll discuss how to successfully navigate the future of work and an evolving workplace as a forward thinking leader and professional. So, unless you've been living under a rock, chances are you maybe noticed this massive amount of change that we're all going through. And the chances are it's probably also a source of some unwelcome stress for you as an individual. So, we'll dive into what this does to you and how it impacts your teams and the workplace around you. And most importantly, what you can do to thrive during these unprecedented times. So Melissa is the CEO of GrowFused at growfused.com of Vienna, Austria, and Dubai. Like I said, she's a world traveler. She helps people grow, stretch their vision, and push their boundaries. And most of all, her specialty is providing tools to create action-oriented plans to drive their careers forward and your careers forward in a decisive manner while successfully navigating turbulent waters of change. So I'm really excited to have Melissa on the show. Great to see you, Melissa. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're sitting in this world, in this lovely world. And thank you so much, Erin, for this lovely introduction.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the show. Again, if you are tuning in live now, please disregard the earlier broadcast because we had a small technical difficulty. But I'm really glad that we can get together and have this conversation. So hopefully you'll be able to join us today and talk about what it is. Globally we're experiencing a massive amount of change, and that change is affecting everybody. And speaking of change, I know, Melissa, that you had a great career history, in the professional world, and then decided now to help leaders lead better, particularly through turbulent times, and help their teams see their highest potential. What made you make that shift, from where you were in your professional career to what you're doing now?
It might be a little bit weird, but on the other side, everybody probably knows the same feeling. It was something which was not really planned. It just kind of happened.
Mm.
Um,
I've never
so,
heard that
um,
before.
so I was a CEO, of course, a lot of business development, sales, always traveling, always in the airplane. I was living in Singapore, living the life, and I don't know, just like suddenly CEOs were coming to me and talking about their problems and how they were feeling and their issues and how they can deal with these issues. And
Mhm.
so this kind of like happened. And then it started with one guy and then more and more came. And at some point I was just like, well, okay, so maybe there's something there. And maybe I should actually really continue this journey. And especially at that time, I had to figure out what would be in my next move. What do I want to do next in my career? I was a long time already in this field. I was almost 9 years already in Singapore. Often you say if you are more than 10 years in one place, you probably will stay there and you won't move anymore somewhere else. So I really had to make this decision, the decision where, what is my next step? And then I actually decided to return back to Europe because I thought it might be a good idea just to really come back to my roots and
Mm-hmm.
really see also what is really going on right now in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
because of course going on vacation somewhere or living somewhere is a whole different ball game.
Right.
Yeah, so that was actually kind of like what led into this journey, and then I did my studies and trainings and lots of different things, and now I've been on this journey now for, yeah, 4 or 5 years already. Time flies
Yeah,
so fast.
congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I know you travel a lot for your work, and I'm really interested to talk to you about how, this type of world change and everything we've been through, the pandemic, and then, the Great Resignation, the fallout of that, because I call it the pandemic the time of great reflection. And
Yeah.
now we're seeing some great resignation. People and teams are experiencing a very different workplace, and what's moving into the future is obviously going to be much different than we've experienced in the past. So I'd love to hear, the global perspective, because different cultures, we were chatting a little bit before the show started, and, different cultures handle things very, very differently.
Yeah.
Um, in the US, we have this what's called quiet quitting. And of course, when you mentioned it earlier, Melissa, of course, my eyes lit up. I was like, wait a minute, that's, it's a bogus thing. And you're like, but wait, in the US, or the US is very different. In overseas in Europe, or I just got back from the UK actually, it's it's a different perspective and it's a different culture. So cultural expectations are going to play a major role in what and how the workplace transforms in those areas.
Yeah. Well, it really actually depends on the region and on the country, and also how the governments dealt with the situation as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in some countries, life basically didn't change a lot. Maybe there was just like for 3, 4 weeks, maybe a short lockdown because the
Mm-hmm.
government wasn't sure what's really going to happen and what does this really mean for the country. But
Mm-hmm.
then they actually moved on like pretty normal. So there wasn't a lot of disruption. And what I realized, especially in countries where you had a lot of uncertainty, where you never knew, lockdown here, lockdown there. Austria, I think now, if I counted correctly, had 5 lockdowns.
Wow.
So it is just like really crazy, and then you can't plan, and then it just gets to your mind, and that really stresses you because you just don't know what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas in other countries, they just didn't have to deal with this on an everyday basis. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, there were specific things like wearing face masks or disinfecting hands and all of this. But apart from that, life went along as normal.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just like really very, very different how different countries reacted to the situation. And I can see also with my coaching clients how different their mental stability right now is, also how what are their topics right now. And
Right.
that is really, really fascinating,
Mm-hmm.
where you also have like so many different challenges on so many different levels. But of course, a lot of things are also very similar to different countries and different cultures, like the new way of work, home office,
Mm-hmm.
virtual meetings, and all of this, where we have seen that this also has created a lot of potential and also a lot of growth for companies as well,
Mm-hmm.
because suddenly you had like huge and different markets in front of your doorstep where you could
Mm-hmm.
reach them just with a click on your Zoom button, and that
Mm-hmm.
was it.
Right.
So really, really fascinating. And because things happen so fast, also companies had to adjust so quickly, and
Mm-hmm.
also employees had to adjust so quickly.
Right. Right.
Where say from a consultant standpoint, I was kind of like feeling like standing like the whole time on the flip chart, and like every 3 hours creating different scenarios. Like, what do we need to do next? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do I need to tell my team, and how do we need to move along, and what are the struggles? Which countries? So really, really fascinating.
It is very fascinating. And different cultures, different regions, even in the US, I mean, the different states handled the lockdowns and the restrictions much differently.
Yeah.
Of course, I've, live streaming from Texas, and Texas handled things, whether it disagree or agree, very differently than the rest of the United States. We
Mhm.
lifted our restrictions quite early, based on some other northern countries or California, for example. And we got back to business, quote unquote, as usual, if you will, within
Mm.
reason. So that got under a lot of fire. Different
Mm.
people didn't necessarily agree with it. Um, and on the flip side, the economy didn't suffer as well as much either. So, wherever you stand on the decisions that were made, they were made for various reasons. But really, the birth of that reason is the culture of the people that reside in that area, whether they're more fear based, whether they're risk tolerant or not, whether they're the type of people who are like, we're just going to get on with living, whether they're the people who are like, no, I'd rather not take the risk. I'd rather, go into lockdowns. So it really depends. And you will see that culture in that area then drive what we're going to experience next in the workforce.
Yeah.
What does the future of work look like? And we were just chatting before we went live, a little bit about, hey, overseas in Europe, if you're going to not want to come into the office, that could restrict your ability to move up or be
Mm.
promoted, or might even put you on the chopping block for the
Yeah.
next layoff. Which in the U.S. we're like, what do you mean? What?
Yeah, it is. It is really, it depends, of course, also on the company culture. And if we're talking about a new economy firm, about an old economy firm, how are the structures? Is it more a traditional firm?
Mm,
So it all depends. Of course, if we talk about jobs where you're anyway sitting at the desk and it's better for you to focus,
mm,
you of course can be more productive again if you work at home, if you have a quiet and peaceful environment where you're not disturbed every few minutes
right.
with whatever's going on. People are walking by or just like, I don't want to interrupt you, but I just have a quick question.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, and sometimes that's multiple times a day.
yes. um, so I think it actually really depends. On the other side, of course, there are like jobs where it just doesn't work. If you're a nurse, if you're a farmer, and for really substantial jobs, which you also need, like you don't have a choice, and you
Mm,
can't just say
you're
like,
you're going
oh,
to show up on the
yeah,
job
yeah,
site, yeah, particularly
yeah,
in farming.
yes. Yeah, and it is crazy anyway, because on top of that, of course, in Europe we even have more challenges with the whole war situation between Russia and Ukraine, and gas and all of these problems, prices increasing, inflation as well, where everybody was hoping that COVID is now kind of like over, and let's move
Mhm.
back into our normal routine. Unfortunately, that's also not really happening.
That's not really happening because now we have a war that's creating some sanctions and restrictions upon, pipelines of fuel or food or what have you, and it's creating some hardships in those areas as well, which creates more stress. And
Yeah.
we were talking about, gosh, why are these people just unplugging? That term was
Mm.
very popular right now, called
Mm.
quiet quitting, which lights my fuse a little bit, because um, I feel like, from the American perspective, because people worked so many hours during the lockdowns and the isolation of COVID, during the 2020 and 2021 specifically, that we're seeing people starting to just back off the gas a little bit and give themselves a break, because we have burnouts at an all-time high. People are literally having mental breakdowns. I mean, they
Mm.
just cannot handle that much continuously. It's not sustainable. And I was counseling these people during this time. You can't keep working this many hours. You will have a repercussion. And now we're seeing that repercussion. And as someone who has personally experienced burnout, I can tell you that you just don't have the wherewithal to show up like you were. You're just not physically capable.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see a lot of that. And on the other hand, we're also seeing, younger generations who have watched their parents, work, blood, sweat, and tears, all these hours, maybe miss, important aspects of their childhood, and then only to be laid off as a thanks for their loyalty. They are not buying into the cultural busyness, the paradigm that Americans have put themselves into in the past. They're just not
Yeah.
buying into it, and they're creating a new definition of success, which I cannot fault them for that. I really
Yeah.
can't. You know, yeah.
It is. I have seen this big issue as well, because nobody has taught anybody. We haven't been taught to deal with having all these options 24 hours a day, right?
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
is so easy to always fall into the trap to always answer emails. You didn't learn to set boundaries, and so you
Right.
continuously work. And it is actually so, so important to really be hard on yourself as well. Just say like,
Mhm.
no, close the door, shut off your laptop, put off your phone, whatever you need to do. I often even tell my clients, just put a reminder on your phone that at a specific time the alarm clock goes off. I'm done for today, and I'm not going to do anything else. And even if the phone rings, you just don't pick it up anymore, and that's it. But you really need to learn to just switch all of this up, and this also means a lot of discipline.
A lot of discipline. Now, what's very interesting is the people who struggle with setting those boundaries the most also struggle with setting personal boundaries for themselves. And that can come from either an insecurity, a personal lack of self worth, or fear.
Yeah,
So this typically in that category somewhere.
yeah, yeah,
Afraid that they're going to lose their job, or they're afraid, or personal self worth issues because they don't ever put themselves first. Like they're not kind to themselves. And when someone's not kind to themselves, they're not likely to set those boundaries.
yeah. And it's very often people just think like, oh, it's only 5 minutes. It's just like one email, be only 2 minutes, and then it
Mhm.
moves from one to another, and then it's just like it just never ends. And like so often also even setting boundaries with families. Now very often the woman is the caretaker of the house. She takes care of the family dinners and whatnots. And
Mhm.
even communicating this, like, I do not want to be disturbed, and please respect my boundaries.
Right.
These are all new things, like women also need to learn, or also like who is in charge of cooking tonight, and who's in charge of emptying the dishwasher and laundry. So there were so many things where women needed to take care of, which were all very new.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so
Well,
so yeah,
yeah, I mean, and those definitions are changing too. So
yeah,
we're now having more gender equality as far as household items. I mean, my
yeah,
husband does the dishes and vacuums. I don't usually. He does that. That's what he
yeah,
likes to do. So and I get take care of the garden. I mean, it's
yeah,
depending on what our personal gifts and talents are
yeah,
versus you're a woman and you're a man and you do this and you do that. Those lines are changing too. So what we're
yeah,
having is we have disaster fatigue,
mm,
right? And globally, I believe we all
yeah,
have disaster fatigue. We have massive changes, both economically, socially, and in the workplace or in our careers as well, about what's expected, what's not expected, what's the norm, what's not the norm. What definitions of self are also shifting? Who are you? What is your meaning? What is your space? In
yeah,
this time that you're here, and what is your contribution to that? And then, I mean, it's just so much is shifting. It's impossible to expect someone to be able to show up 100% with this much inundation. It's
yeah,
just not possible. And
yeah,
I think that's another reason why we're seeing a lot of unplugging.
yeah. It is, for me, it is to some extent, it's also just like self-care.
Hmm.
And which is also important, because you need to take care of your health first, because you can't perform if you don't take care of yourself, right?
Hmm.
And at some point, you just need to unplug in order to regain your energy, refocus, get new
Hmm.
energy, and then jump into the markets.
Hmm.
Plus, now, because a lot of people had time to also rethink their lives, like, what do I want to do next? Does my job actually really make me happy? Um, what is going on in my life? Maybe you changed, even like your values have changed, maybe.
Hmm.
So these are even new things which are coming up. And what do I want of my life? Maybe I want to go traveling. On top of that, we've got so many options nowadays. You can just move to Dubai. You can just move to Bali, and become a digital nomad. So you have so many options as well.
Right. All right. Absolutely. Although some companies frown upon that if you don't
Yeah,
tell them first. We've had that discussion with one of my executives. So
yeah,
Hussein is tuning in. Great to see you, Hussein, always. He said, I think one of the most important things to improve is your capabilities to be an example for those around you. Amen to that. Because we can't change other people. We can only set an example, and then through influence. create hopefully that change. He says, in addition to your being a good listener and not making your decisions based on simply a reaction. So
Yeah.
thinking first, being responsible versus reactive. Appreciate those thoughts, Hussein. You always have and good insights to add. I'm glad that you were able to make it over here to our live stream. Um, yeah, so absolutely. How do we upshift? Getting to the topic of the day, how do we upshift? How do we unlock that potential? We know, okay, what do we know? Well, the facts are our brains aren't built to handle this much stress. Um, we are built through evolution to handle short-term stress, fight or flight, run away from the saber-toothed tiger or fight it off with, beat it with a club or what have you. We're built to handle that. However, if that stress exists for long periods of time, what do we see? We see a decline in cognitive function. Actually, our ability to make good decisions goes in the tank. So literally, we become less smart,
Yeah.
quite literally.
Yeah.
We become more emotional reactive versus Hussein, as he just mentioned, being responsible, being intentional. We become more reactive. And typically on the negative side, we see more negativity.
Yeah.
We also we don't know how to prioritize. And that's something you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
Melissa, is a struggle with prioritization. We're seeing
Yeah.
that a lot. So that's what we're seeing in addition to some other things as well, tribalism, fixed mentalities, because
Yeah.
and why are people here? Because they can't handle everything. So they're
Yeah.
retreating back to this place of familiarity, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Yeah.
So what can we do?
Well, I think actually one very important part is habits, good habits.
Mhm.
That is so important, especially the morning routine and the evening routine.
Mhm.
I feel actually those are two very, very key points in your life. We all know life happens, we are stressed, we need to walk with the dog, the kids, and breakfast and meetings and whatnots. But it is really important actually to have this routine and this
Mhm.
habit to wake up early, to take time and not rush, rush, rush,
Right,
but
exactly.
really start like really drinking some water with lemon,
Mhm.
do some light exercise, whatever you like to
Mhm.
do, if it's a yoga or maybe going for a walk or whatever, to really breathe the fresh air, be present, be in
Absolutely.
the moment. If you can, like even slot a short session to read a book or a chapter,
Yeah.
to focus on your goals, like what do I actually want to achieve today, or what do I want to achieve during this week.
Mhm.
Really focus, and also these mini meditations where I said like nobody needs to do like meditations for 5 hours per day.
No,
Nobody's
and
time.
and how many people are actually really good at that?
Yeah.
No, no,
So it
right.
is that amazing, like a small mini meditations where you can just like really focus for 5 or 10 minutes, focus on your breath, focus on what's important. And I feel that really helps so much. And the same thing is again during the evening time, like, switch off electronic articles. Don't put all the stuff in your bedroom. Keep it out of your bedroom. Let in the fresh air before you go to bed. Do something nice and calm down your mind before you go to bed. Like, I
Mhm.
don't know, have a bath or read a book or do whatever, what's good for your mind so you can actually really like calm it
Rest.
down and not
Yeah.
be like all
Too
like,
many people forget that the most important foundation, other than eating and breathing, is also sleeping. And
yes,
we tend to really put that on the back burner. It's very fascinating to me because it's like, okay, you need to eat and
yeah,
you need to breathe.
yeah.
How about that other one? How
Yeah.
about that other one? It's called sleep. Because if you don't get good sleep, then everything else suffers. And Patrick had a pithy comment here. He said, focus on the critical few, not the trivial many. Yes, absolutely. And what we're finding now is very interesting. You went to that first, Melissa, because, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been our go-to response necessarily. We would have put it in there, but we would have probably talked about something around, okay, well, have, a smart system, plan better, do this methodology. We're not talking about that right now. We're not
Yeah.
talking about planning systems and methodologies. Not that these things aren't important. We're talking about getting back to the basics,
Yeah.
really getting back to the
Yeah.
basics. So why is that? Well, The only way for us, until we evolve to handle all these things we're being inundated with on a daily basis, the only way to be able to thrive during massive change is to get back to the basics, to simplify, to keep it simple, right? It's absolutely critical. We're not talking about, oh, let's do, the 20-step program or some plan here, or make sure that you show up at XYZ meeting. We're not really talking about that, and not that those things aren't important, but in order to really show up to Upshift, it's about decluttering.
Yeah. It's so true, and it is so interesting that even though these are actually easy things, it is still so
Mhm.
difficult for us to do on a regular basis. We all know the sleeping issue, and we all know we should go to bed earlier, but still
Mhm.
we don't do it. And
Right.
it is the same thing with food, especially now where it is so critical to be healthy, and fit, like really to see like what do I eat and what do I give my body. I want to give my body energy, and healthy foods, and not just like I don't know, eat chips and all kinds of unhealthy stuff,
Mhm.
sweets and chocolate, because I'm frustrated, and
Or
sugar and
busy, or I'm just eating at my desk. If you're eating at all, and that doesn't work. It does not work. It's not sustainable. You can't keep doing that and be
yeah,
showing up in the space you want in your life, because your next is defined by your now.
yeah,
I'll say that again. Your next is defined by your now. So what are you doing now is determines what's next for you.
yeah,
And if you think it's not the case, you're fooling yourself, because
yeah,
it absolutely is true. Every single action you take defines what you're going to experience next.
yeah, yeah,
So if you're just pushing through that deadline and saying, oh, well, I'll just, eat bad now and it'll be okay. Well, if it's once in a while, it's very rare, okay,
yeah,
maybe you can get away
yeah,
with that.
yeah,
And I'd also say probably it's happening more than just the once in a while.
yeah. Yeah, and I think also another point which is really important is to set some me time apart, and it doesn't matter how long this me time is. It can be just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you can do, just to really be by yourself and just reflect, especially at the end of the day, what happened today, what was good, what was maybe not that good. But also to be aware of how you talk to yourself. Like, what language do you use? Is it an empowering language towards yourself? Or is it
Mhm.
actually more a negative language towards yourself?
Critical.
Yeah,
Yeah, we find that a lot in high achievers. Now, you
yeah,
mentioned earlier, we know about the sleep. We know that we should be taking, what I call power pauses throughout the day, which is 5 to 10 minute breaks, and completely unplug, keep your cognitive function at peak level, and keep emotionally balanced, and all these things. We know this. We know this.
yeah,
Why don't we do it? Why? Well, because we've been programmed to be busy. That's
yeah,
why,
yeah,
particularly in the American culture. Now, we did talk about a lot of differences between the American culture and cultures overseas, and I'd love to highlight that a little bit
mm,
because, in America, and I think anyone tuning in from America right now would agree, we're addicted to being busy. We really are. I mean, it's almost like a status symbol. Well, how are you today? Oh, I'm so busy. And it's just like this badge of honor. I'm
mm,
busy, well, look at me. I'm great. It's just another way of saying I'm a contributing member to society when it has nothing to do with it.
yeah,
But that's how we're programmed. And
yeah,
to think that, to be better, to be thriving, to make better decisions, and actually be, thriving as a leader, thriving in our business as an entrepreneur or as a team member, what have you, that we
mm,
actually have to stop and do nothing.
mm.
Concept is mind boggling. Now, I'd love to hear from the European perspective. What's the difference?
Well, I personally feel some people might disagree. It depends also a little bit on countries now. I always see in financial centers or financial cities, of course, also the level is high paced, like in New York and
Mhm.
things like that. I feel in comparison, work-life balance in Europe is a little bit more higher because you've got more vacation. You have more social security compared to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you don't get into this debt situation as quickly as like in the U.S. because you have to pay for university schoolings, medical bills, etc. So I feel the pressure is not as high as like in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also your perception, what you just mentioned just now, like how do you want to be perceived by other people? And I feel that in Europe, or it depends again, which region. Also, are you in the countryside? Are you in the city? And I think also maybe in the US, it's similar, like where people are perceived more as a hard worker if you're a farmer and if you do something with your hands, and then people don't understand why you're sitting at home and doing something with your brain. Whereas in the city, it is of course vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends, and it is actually really interesting because then again, I spent a lot of time in Dubai, which of course is again like a thriving city, a trade city, and then also again, it depends often on the age of society of the country. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
say, like in some countries where the age is very young, like the average age, like in Vietnam, the average age is like 27, 28.
Hmm.
So, of course, again, the mentality or what people want to do in their life and how they perceive the situation right now is, of course, very different.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have right now, like really the people, the young people are burning in Vietnam. They want to do business. They want to go. They want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now some countries, of course, are over exaggerate. They're moving now backwards because they achieved that peak already.
Mm-hmm.
So Europe right now is going down because they achieved their peak already, and now different countries are going to move
Okay.
upward.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah,
I hadn't really thought about that.
yeah.
I do know that we talked a little bit about the more of the perspective, particularly with this great resignation and the
Mm,
remote work and how that's being taken in the EU versus America. So I'd love to
yeah.
hear your perspective about that a little bit as well.
Yeah. So it is quite a complicated topic. There is a lot of movement right now happening on all levels. There was a very brief time where employees had kind of the power with a great resignation, but actually, due to the war situation with Ukraine and Russia and inflation and prices and even more change happening, there was actually again a very quick shift moving more towards security.
Oh,
So
okay.
work-life balance was suddenly again gone,
Mm,
moving into security, because people, of course, have to prepare for a recession. A
mm,
lot of people are being laid off now in specific companies, especially also in a lot of big startups.
mm,
So, which means suddenly this culture war, it was so cool and glamorous going into a startup and we're going to change the world. Suddenly people were just lost all their jobs and was like, oh, wow. So what do we do now? Where
mm,
people now prefer to move again more into traditional companies because they need to pay their bills, right?
mm,
So this shift is very interesting, and on top of this shift, also we need to talk about the new skill sets, what people will need for the future, because there's also again a huge shift where there'll be a lot of transformation about what is actually being needed in the workforce.
mm. Okay.
So even there's a lot of challenging because due to globalization and digitalization, a lot of
Mm,
jobs will be actually won't be existing anymore in a couple of years. Like the bookkeeping ladies who are just typing in some sort of information, you
right.
won't need that anymore. That will be all done with digital stuff and artificial intelligence and all of this.
Mm,
So I've actually got like some numbers for Germany, where McKinsey was saying the future of work after COVID-19, how will the workplace or what will be changing actually by 2030, where they're saying that 10.5 million people are changing from, they are faced with massive change in general.
mm, mm.
10.5 million people. We're just talking about Germany. We're talking about 6.5 million people who will need to learn new skills.
Wow.
And then we also have 4 million people who will need to change their jobs entirely because they need to learn new skills.
Wow. Wow.
So even there's a massive shift.
Right, right. So you would think that that's going to happen just in the urban areas first, obviously, because having traveled overseas and having recently done so, when you move away from the more densely populated
Mm,
areas and you're looking at the smaller hamlets and villages, the way
mm,
of life is very, very different.
yeah,
Very, very different. So I'm thinking that this will impact people who are more in those high, vibrant cities, those more densely populated areas, and perhaps this will then trickle down very slowly to the more outlying areas because unless a lot of changes are made, and I know some technologies or changes are coming to say farming and production and that sort of thing.
mm,
They're trying to automate farming. Good luck with that.
yeah,
I think you can do it. And, well, anyway, I think some countries will push back very firmly against too much chemical and automation in the
mm,
farming industries because that'll put farmers out of business entirely, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then you lose, and some people are not necessarily, they don't have the groundwork to easily reskill, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
So I feel like you're right. And what's interesting is the difference in what's pushing the great resignation and the shifts that are happening. I'm
yeah,
not saying that these are not impacting America, they are. But a lot of what's pushing the great resignation was the availability suddenly of a lot of jobs. And then the fact that people had kind of put up with their position through the pandemic and put massive amount of hours in and doing so remotely, which interestingly enough, while people for the most part are wanting remote work, it's actually impacting their sense of connectivity to the company and their team in a negative way. So these people don't realize that the dissatisfaction they're feeling isn't necessarily about what they're doing, it's about the fact they don't see the people they work with anymore.
yeah. But it is also so interesting, like we were discussing earlier, the differences also between the US and Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Because just this morning I was talking to a coaching client of mine, and he was just saying, like, he's thinking of moving jobs because he wants to be back in the office. And he
Mm-hmm.
actually bought a house outside in the countryside, and now the commute will be just too long. So now he would actually prefer a job somewhere in his neighborhood
Right.
where he actually could go into work. Because he said, I've been working now remote for so long, and actually I realize now I'm kind of sick of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
also it's kind of interesting. And also
very
recently I was
interesting.
talking to a student, and for me it was interesting to see where the young people, how they think home office, go back to the office, or what do they
Mm-hmm.
what is interesting for them. And she was also saying, like, I want to go into an office because I want to learn from people, I want to listen, and I want to participate, I want to create innovation. And if I sit at home in front of my laptop, that won't happen.
You're right. It does. It does reduce neuroplasticity to a great degree, and that's not being helped by the fact that all of the algorithms show us more of the same.
Yeah.
So we're not being given the opportunity to form new ideas and be innovative because we're not getting that information. Now, Patrick also mentioned, yes, it was Patrick here. Great to see you again, Patrick. He said, check out the John Deere video on Farm Forward.
Mm.
Lots of tech and next generation in art and agriculture. So, tech is going everywhere. Here's the fascinating thing, ladies and gentlemen, whether you're tuning in now or later, we are poised on the brink of a completely new era, and know that yes, it comes with a lot of change, and it's almost like we're drinking from a fire hose. In a way we are, because
Yeah.
it's changing extraordinarily rapid. It is compounding change, and on top of everything that we're experiencing personally as well. So as we move forward, when we talk about tools to help upshift our life and unlock our potential, it's typically not about doing more. It's really about simplifying because the human evolves quite slow. Now, we have seen tremendous changes in how younger people interact with technology. Sometimes they're a little scary, but sometimes these have side effects as well. For example, a study was done in 2000, and between 2000 and 2005, on college students specifically around empathy, and the level dropped by around 60% between 2000 and 2005 in college students in the study. Now, that's 2005.
Wow, that's crazy. That's insane. Wow.
And they extrapolated one of the reasons why is the intervention of technology. So
Mm.
when you're talking about remote work and being more distant from people, what is the impact going to be about that long term? So being very intentional, thinking about, okay, what do I want my life to evolve like? I want my professional life to evolve. And how can I position myself based on my gifts and strengths and talents wisely to
Yeah.
make the right actions happen based on my intentional decisions versus just reacting to a massive amount of information being thrown at me. And the only way to do that is to find space and
Yeah.
to create that space in your day. And it can be very, very simple. Like Melissa mentioned, creating that intentional morning and evening, taking a pause throughout the day, which I tend to encourage people to do, is taking those micro pauses, those micro breaks, completely unplugging, allow your brain to refresh their glycogen stores, and so that way you're much more effective and efficient. And also realizing that when you do this, you can actually accomplish a lot more in 4 hours than you can 8.
And it is also so interesting, I think, also the perception of how you see change. Like I
Mhm.
always say, it is a great idea to really try to focus on seeing change as something positive and not
Mhm.
something what is happening against you, but actually for you.
Right.
And if you lose your job or you decided to get a divorce right now because due to lockdown situations, you realize like, oh my God, we don't match. To actually really see it from the other side. So
Mhm.
what does this teach me? What does this tell me about myself? And how can I move from here? And I think that is so important. And just like really, I always say life is like a roller coaster ride. And I think the more you try to control it, the more difficult it gets and the more frustrated you get and the more you tense up and then diseases happen and all of these things. Um, so I think it is actually, I just say, close your eyes, start screaming, and just go with the ride and just enjoy it. Yeah, sometimes it's freaking scary. And then you laugh and then you cry and then everything at the same time. But it will get better. And I think that is just important also to focus on. And in the end, like you will always know, if you look back 5 years, like, thank
Mhm.
God I went through that. I know it was horrible during that time. But now it actually gave me the possibility to really grow and move along and actually really live maybe your true potential.
Mhm. Right.
Because,
I mean, something, like for example, I during my not most recent vacation, but vacation before that, earlier in the summer in July. So July 4th, I had 102-degree fever with COVID.
mm,
And by the way, I was not home. I was very far away from home. I was all the way across the country in a hotel.
mm,
It was not a good time.
mm,
So you can look at that multiple different ways. And I chose to do what I could with what I had, which was very little. I'm COVID. I'm horribly ill,
mm,
and managed to get through it okay. But what it did enable me to do was it enabled me to travel to overseas without any concern because
yeah,
I have my antibodies.
yeah, yeah,
I actually now really have
yeah,
antibodies. So I was able to have that degree of confidence. So it's like, okay, at the time, it was not fun. I don't
yeah,
recommend this at
yeah,
all to anyone. In
yeah,
fact, it's horrible.
yeah,
I mean, it took me a month to get over it. And it enabled me to do a lot afterwards because I
yeah,
felt a bit more freer. So, when you're in the middle of something very gripping, just know that it's temporary and it will pass.
yeah.
Of course, that's easy for us to say, and being removed now, but when we're in the moment, it can be a bit more challenging. And I
Yeah,
think too, in order, as we wrap up the show, to leave you with something tangible here, we talked about power pausing, we talked about, really being intentional with the morning and the evening and getting not having necessarily have a program or some sort of plan or some sort of routine. more about routine, more about the habits we have and how we are being as a person, because we can't absorb it all, and being very choosy and prioritizing about what
Mm.
inputs we give into our life. Maybe we don't tune into that news broadcast a show because we know it negatively impacts us. And can we influence change upon what we're learning? Maybe not. Maybe we don't listen to that podcast. Maybe we listen to something different that's
Mm.
more uplifting and motivational, like Career Coffee Chat, for example.
Mm. Mm.
And maybe we get a little bit more comfortable with um, just not having all the answers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so true.
So, Melissa, it's been extremely informative and very eye opening to know a little bit more about how different areas of the world are handling what's going on right now and how we can carve a path forward. And I think we've all kind of agreed that it's there's no new normal yet. That's a long time coming.
Yeah.
And it will be very interesting how that unfolds. And I predict that there won't be just one path. It will kind of be choose your own adventure. If you want to
Yeah.
go on the big tech path and go all automated, that will be an avenue for you. If you want to get back to something more simplistic, that will be available to you. But we'll have a lot of different choices and options,
Yeah.
which will
And in
be
the end, it's all a lot about our mindset as well. Yeah.
exactly. So, any other thoughts you'd like to add? Anything you'd like to share with folks before we wrap up?
I just think one more sentence or one point. I know in the US it's very normal, but in a lot of other countries not. It's embracing the failure culture.
Mhm.
It is so important also if things go wrong, don't be too hard to yourself. Really just reflect what went wrong, what are my learnings actually, and then moving along from there. And I
Mhm.
think that is like super, super important because we can't grow without failure. And I think that is also so important to keep in mind. If things should go wrong, if you experience negative things, you will grow. And it's all
Right.
about the process. You need to grow in order to experience happiness. That is how our life is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very, very true. So, as we do experience things that are setbacks, just know that the opportunity is right around the corner. Every setback is an opportunity, actually. That's a
Yeah.
good way to look at it.
Yeah.
So, David, good to see you tuning into the show. He said thank you. And Patrick as well, great to see you. And any of you tuning in either now or later, I'm glad to have you on the show as always, my friends. It's wonderful to see you. And should you be watching the replay later, don't be shy. Say hi, say where you're from. Give us both a shout. Send us a comment or send us a message if you have a question about something or what have thoughts or just want to know how you can thrive during unprecedented times, which it certainly is. So, as always, my friends, it's great to see you. Great to have you tune in. And until next time, keep elevating. Bye bye for now.
Bye. Bye bye.